Daring in the Desert, Chapter 5. Back home in London, Lilias was soon at work at the Welbeck Street Institute, but she had other ideas too. "I was thinking," she said to her sister Emily, and then fell silent. "Are you going to share your thinking, or just leave me hanging here?" laughed Emily. Lilias smiled. "It's just an idea. I don't know if anything could come of it, but..." There was another pause while she sorted out her thoughts. "You know that at Welbeck Street we look after the young women and do what we can for them. Well, just a few streets away, there are different kinds of girls and women. Perhaps we could do something for them, too." "What do you mean?" Emily puzzled. "Well, I'm thinking of the businesswomen who work in the high-class shops in Regent Street and Oxford Street, and those who work for the trading houses. They don't need cheap housing, but perhaps we could give them something that they do need. Do you think that we might hold meetings for them too? Meetings where we could talk about Jesus and study the Bible?" Emily was quiet for a little while. That was a feature of Lilias and her sisters. They didn't rush into speaking before they worked out what they wanted to say. "I'm sure meetings like that would be a real help to them, and they'd enjoy them too, I'd imagine," said Emily. "But I can't think of where you'd meet. These girls wouldn't feel comfortable going to the Welbeck Street Institute, and they'd probably not want to go to a church hall unless it was their own church. You know what people are like." "I know that," Lilias agreed. "But I was thinking of having meetings in homes, in our drawing room, for example." Now, before you think that every large house in Britain had a room especially for people to draw in, they didn't then, and they certainly don't now. In the 16th century, grand houses had a room that the owners and their guests could withdraw or go out to for privacy from other people in the house. That's why it was called the withdrawing room, or eventually the name was shortened to drawing room over the years. Emily and her sister talked for a long time and decided that Lilias's idea could work. A little group of young women investigated the high-class businesses and shops in central London and found out who worked there. Then they sent invitations to drawing room meetings at homes in the Trotter's house or others in Montague Square. Young women and some older women, too, went along. Perhaps some just went to see the inside of a lovely house. Maybe others went because they thought the invitations were very kind. And I'm sure that a few went along because they were lonely and hoped to make new friends. But whatever brought them, all the women who attended heard about the Lord Jesus in the relaxed surroundings of the Trotter's own home. If all that sounds deadly serious and boring, here is what someone wrote about 40 Montague Square. That unique household where Lily lived with her mother and brother and sisters was a place of sunny gladness and laughter. You'll notice that Lilias was called Lily. That was her pet name. Some friends of Lilias and her sisters also went to the meetings, and very soon those who came from the shops and other businesses felt part of that very happy group of young women. Some people seem to think that they can only talk about God in a very serious voice, and that he disapproves of laughter and happiness. What they forget is that God, who made all things, made laughter and happiness too. When John Ruskin returned to England from Venice, he did not forget about Lilias. In fact, they wrote to each other often, and sometimes he asked her to send drawings and paintings for him to look at. One set of 6 paintings done on a holiday in Norway were framed by him and shown to his students at Oxford. That was despite having told them before he met the Trotters that women could never draw or paint as well as men. When he showed them Norwegian paintings, Mr. Ruskin told his students that they were exactly what we should all like to be able to do. And that was one big compliment. Not only did John Ruskin and Lilias write letters, but they became visitors to each other's homes. Mr. Ruskin invited Lilias to visit him in the Lake District, and she went there from time to time with her mother and sisters. When Mrs. Trotter first wrote her note to John Ruskin, You might remember he was in a rather sulking kind of mood about having to be polite about Lilius's paintings. Things must have changed. Here's what he wrote the day before he was expecting Lilius and her sister Margaret to arrive at Brantwood, his splendid home overlooking Coniston Water. I am ready for you both this minute, if you could only come. Oh dear, I'm afraid it's going to rain tomorrow, and right now it's exquisite. But rain or cloud, it will still be beautiful. The woods are in such glory, and laburnum and hawthorn are at their best. Not a rose out, yet you will watch them through all their sweet lives. Love to Margaret. Her room is little but close to your turret, and she can skip across in the early morning. That doesn't sound in the least sulky, does it? We're nearly there, Lilius said as their carriage trundled along the road the day after the letter was written. To their right was a steep, tree-covered hillside, and to their left, the hill continued downwards toward the lake. As they turned a corner, a road went off to the right and climbed steeply upwards. There's Brantwood, Lilius laughed. We're here. Before their carriage reached the front of the cream-colored, three-story house, John Ruskin flung open the door and rushed out to welcome his guests. It's not raining after all, said Margaret. Just look at that view. They stood for a few moments as the coachman talked to the horses. They were very happy to stop, as the road had been hilly. Well, that's the old man of Coniston, Mr. Ruskin told Margaret, pointing to the mountain on the other side of the lake. And you wouldn't have been able to see it earlier because of the rain. I told the sun to come out and welcome you, and it has, he laughed. As soon as Margaret and Lilius had taken off their coats and bonnets, they were shown to the drawing room and served Indian tea. No lady would have gone without a bonnet in the 1880s. I love this room, smiled Lilius. It feels like home. John Ruskin sat back in his chair and smiled. What do you like about it? He asked. As usual, the young woman thought before she answered, and anyway, she was ready for tea. I like that painting, she told him, pointing to a picture of Mr. Ruskin as a 3-year-old boy wearing a white dress tied with a blue ribbon that matched his light blue shoes. The shoes were also tied with blue ribbons. Fashions have certainly changed since John wore that dress in 1822 as a little child. Margaret rose and went to look at his shell collection that was laid out on a tall cabinet. These are beautiful, she commented. Her sister looked from the shells to the collections of stones beside them. I like the stones too, Lilius told John Ruskin. They remind me of that piece of marble you asked me to sketch when we first met in Venice. Later on, in their visit to Brantwood, Lilius and Margaret were discussing their favorite colors. I don't like purple, said Lilius. I don't know why, but I would never wear anything purple. Margaret didn't have time to reply, for John Ruskin jumped to his feet. You don't like purple? He gasped, amazed at the very thought. Lilius and Margaret just looked at each other as their friend went from one cabinet in the room to another, taking out things to prove what he was about to say. Within minutes, the square table in the middle of the room was almost covered with purple things and books that he took from the glass-fronted bookcase beside the fire. Look at this, he said, handing Lilius a chunk of amethyst about the size of a small loaf of bread. Take it to the window and really look at it, ordered Mr. Ruskin. Imagine that amethyst had eyes, and then look at it in the eyes and tell me you don't think it's beautiful. Lilius went to the window and looked at the thing she held in her hands. She needed both hands because it was very heavy. As she stood by the window, the sun's rays hit the amethyst, and it shone like a pale purple diamond. The light danced on it as she moved the stone this way and that. Doing what she often did, Lilius just looked and looked and looked for what seemed to Margaret a long, long time. It truly is beautiful, Lilius said softly. It is absolutely beautiful." Mr. Ruskin busied himself at the table, finding the pages he was looking for in books and leaving them open in front of him. "Now come here," he told his young friend. "Look at these amethysts. Every one of them is a different shade of purple. Every single one of them is absolutely beautiful. And these rock crystals, are they not lovely too?" Lilias had to agree. She had lost the battle for purple already, and John Ruskin still had more, much more, to say and show to her. "Sit down and look at these," he said to both young women. As the three of them sat round the table, he took book after book and pointed at the pictures of paintings. "What would the great artist John Turner have done without purple?" he asked, showing them scenes with purple mountains and sunsets with purple streaks across golden orange skies. "You're quite right," Lilias finally agreed. "I was wrong. And look at these birds," he told her, showing her paintings by William Hunt. "These birds have purple in them, and you say you don't like purple. When you paint birds, are you going to change them to colors that you do happen to like?" The battle was over. The lesson was done. If you are ever able to see paintings done by Lilias over her long life, you'll discover that purple featured like all the other colors. She painted what she saw in front of her, not what she wanted things to look like.